Now, 3 years ago, Pope Francis, as we've been talking about today, was in Canada, where he expressed deep sorrow for the harm suffered at residential schools. And he asked forgiveness for church members' cooperation with government policies of assimilation and so much more. For more on that, let's go to the CBC's Juanita Taylor, who is in Calgary. Juanita, it is always fantastic to see you. That tour is part of Pope Francis's legacy, but not his only effort at reconciliation, eh?
That's right, Adrian. You go back to March 2022, before he came to Canada, when a delegation of Indigenous people traveled to Rome by invitation from Pope Francis himself. Over a number of days, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders, as well as those impacted by abuse at residential schools, they met privately with the Pope at the Vatican. Some of them told us that they felt a renewed sense of reconciliation after sharing their experiences of attending residential schools in Canada. And Adrian, on their last day in Rome, I remember it so well, actually, before an audience of about 200 people, including bishops, Indigenous delegates, and their supporters, Pope Francis delivered a powerful message that only a few saw coming. He said that he felt sorry and that he felt shame for what had happened at residential schools, acknowledging the damage and indignity visited upon First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children by some members of the church. But Adrian, he stopped short that time, saying that the church itself was responsible.
Juanita, I remember your coverage, and I know it goes on, and there are still questions that people have. There's so many things left undone, but coming out of that visit, what hasn't been accomplished that people are still pushing for?
Well, I mean, we saw the visit that Pope Francis made to Iqaluit in July of 2022, where leaders in Iqaluit called that visit historic. They spent only a few hours in the Nunavut capital in July of 2022, where thousands of people in Iqaluit stood outside to hear and to see and to witness Pope Francis speak, more specifically to hear him apologize for the harms done at residential schools. And Adrian, he did so, and he did so in Inuktitut as well, which pleased a lot of people in Iqaluit that time. He was apologizing for the harm caused to Inuit who attended residential school. And again, that time, some people felt that the apology fell short because Pope Francis didn't apologize for the church's role in abusing children at residential schools. But Adrian, before the event outside, over 100 people, they got to meet and speak directly to Pope Francis inside a private meeting. And that was at inside a school in Iqaluit. One of those who met directly with Pope Francis inside at a private meeting was Tanya Tumilik. She is the daughter of the late Marius Tumilik. She got to speak directly to Pope Francis about her father, who was actually one of the first Inuit to lay charges against retired Catholic priest Johannes Rivor, who had worked in Nunavut as a priest in the 1960s and 70s. Tumilik asked Pope Francis to help pressure France to extradite Rivor back to Canada to face charges of sexual assault. But Adrian, Pope Francis never did, and Rivor died at the age of 93 in April of 2024.
Wow. So much undone, so much left undone. Juanita, thank you very much for speaking with us. Thank you for all the reporting you've done on this, and I know you will continue to do on it. That's Juanita Taylor, who happens to be in Calgary right now. Pope Francis and the legacy of this man following his death. Many in Canada are remembering what we've been talking about all morning, his 2022 visit to apologize to Indigenous peoples for the church's role in residential schools. We're talking about a very powerful, very emotional moment for many communities. So joining us now is AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak. She joins us from the United Nations this afternoon. That's interesting. Thank you for being here. I gather that you're meeting with Indigenous people for a UN forum. So I'm curious to know what the conversations are like there right now.
Absolutely. Look, I think Canada, the Pope had, of course, visited us in 2022. to apologize right on our own homelands. And I know that I know here in the States, of course, there's still a lot of work to do, but back in Canada, for sure we join people from around the world in mourning this great loss of Pope Francis. He listened to us. He listened to our survivors, to the stories of residential school. It's a very tough issue to talk about, but I want to appreciate him for listening to our survivors, for inviting us to the Vatican in April of 2022, which I was a part of, and hearing the history that had happened in our beautiful country, but that had such a dark history. And the conversations are not always easy, but of course the history with the Catholic Church, with First Nations, is very long and negative with residential schools. But I think Pope Francis, he opened up a new chapter to healing for survivors and their families, and we hope that his positive legacy will be carried forward, and that people within the Church will honor his work and continue on with us as we work towards reconciliation, as we work towards healing from the past and finding better ways forward together. That's the legacy that he has left for all of us to follow.
As I think about your spring in 2022 and then the summer in July when Pope Francis came to Canada, that apology, how did that land for you? What was that moment like? You knew it was coming, but it's one thing to know it's coming. It's something else to sit and experience it. What was that like? Phil Fontaine was with me on the bus going into the Vatican, and we got into the Vatican, and the Holy Father was there, and he was, because of how hard him and many other residential school survivors fought so hard to get that apology. I think he was in a surreal moment at that point, and I was listening to many other survivors that were there that fought for many, many, many years against residential school and to bring light to that did happen in our country. And when the apology came that day, I remember looking at those survivors and feeling for them. I went to day school. It was a little different, but looking at the residential school survivors who had to spend most of their childhood in these institutions, and to see them finally get that apology. Some, many people accepted it, but some still didn't and are still coming to grips with that. And then when he came to Musqueam, of course, in Treaty 6 territory in Alberta, and that moment there was really profound. I mean, I didn't think it would be as emotional as it is, and it was extremely emotional day. And it was like trying to rewrite a new chapter of where do we go from here and where are we going from here? Well, one last thought to you is that thought in terms of where you go from here and what role you think Indigenous voices will play sort of in shaping the future direction of the Catholic Church. I mean, here in Canada, but elsewhere.
Absolutely. Look, they still have our artifacts. We have to bring our artifacts back home to Canada. And they have, some of our ceremonial items. And I think that's one step that the Pope had committed to us. We've been working on that with his office for months now, and we don't want that work to stop. And at the same time, we've lost an ally today, and
yes.
He was that we could call and contact and say we need help moving this along. And so he was an ally to First Nations in that way, that he wanted to try and right the wrongs of the past.
As you say, there is still a road ahead, so wishing you courage on that road ahead. Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak, of Assembly of First Nations National Chief, thank you.
Good.